Today, my friends, I bring you the story of the glassmakers, the enchantress, and the blue moon. Greetings, owners of fine luxury cardboard rectangles, and welcome to an interesting lore video based on one of the books that I had been sent out. As you can see over here, the lovely lorebrary has been growing. I thank those of you who have sent in books for me. Now, I read a very interesting story in this one that I had never even heard of anywhere. In fact, I went and did a bit of Googling to see if I could find any additional info on it, and I couldn't find any info. Part of that is probably because there is a really popular modern deck called Blue Moon. And so all my search results, Blue Moon, Magic the Gathering, it just all ends up with tons of different variations of this $1,500 modern deck, where it's just, okay, that's what most people know Blue Moon as, but that's not what we're going to be talking about. We are going to talk about the Isle of Corby. All right, this is the Isle of the Glassmakers, and the reason is this island was home to some very, very, very fine sand. And as a result, they were able to make exceptional glass out of the sand on this island. So over time, more and more people were attracted to this island, and more families got into the business of being glassmakers. And there would be different versions of glassmakers. You would have some that focused on making panes for windows. Like one of the houses of glassmakers pretty much is responsible for all the windows in everybody's houses, that sort of thing. So these glassmakers grew up on this island over time, and so there's 22 different glass making families on this island. All right, there's 22 noble houses of glassmakers. It started out where they would basically it would be the family business, right? Where the kids of the household would be down there shoveling ash and stuff, potash into the furnace and all that to actually smelt down the glass. Like they would basically be required to do the physical labor and learn the process of glassmaking. So you have these houses that are doing that. But at a certain point, they become so wealthy that they've decided, you know what, we no longer want to be the ones doing this labor. It's beneath us. So then they start to outsource and bring in like hired help, and they're treating these people poorly. Basically, they bring in like a peasant class, and these peasant class work on the buildings, and then they're ferried away to like a workman's area where they have to stay when they're not working. And basically, they're only given enough like money to survive. That's it. Just enough to pay for food and things like that. So if you end up getting yourself fired or you want to quit, there's nothing you can do. There's nowhere to go. You're on this island. This is all the work there is. And any kind of ships off charge an inordinate price. So there's a lot of people who come to the city thinking to make their wealth and end up leaving poorer than they started with, because these people end up being abused and taken advantage of. And one of the prominent members of one of these glassmaking houses, which is one of the focal characters of this story, runs a horrible house where he's terrible to his employees. And the story also centers around a lazy, kind of surly employee too. Not a guy you really identify with that much. He doesn't want to do his job. He doesn't like his job. He just doesn't want to do it. And so he's just like, meh. But he's sitting there worrying about starving on the streets. Is the guy tells him to get in this box and clean it out, and he basically melts off to him. So this ruler leader of the glass elite group smashes Buddy with his glass cane, okay? Smashes the cane over him. His cane gets obliterated. This peasant worker gets all cut up and messed up, punches this elite guy in the face, ends up getting arrested and having to pay for the cane and all this stuff. It all becomes a crime on his shoulders, okay? So he's one of the main characters in this book. Now, it reaches the point where he is starving. He no longer has a job because of this falling out with the glassmaker. And this glassmaking leader dude, whose name was Pahardis, he basically put a black ball out on the guy, which means nobody would hire him. So he couldn't get a job anywhere, and he would just basically have to beg for food from people. So he saw a boat out in the harbor that wasn't like any of the normal boats around it. He was thinking about trying to stow away to escape off the island, but the ship captains in the area normally know what the deal is, so they're on the lookout for that. But he spotted a ship that he didn't normally see, and he figured, you know what, I'm going to take a chance with this. So he slipped out into the harbor and he crept his way up onto this ship. When he gets up on the ship, he notices that it's really smooth, and it's a really smooth, weird ship. Like, he doesn't know exactly what the deal is, but there's something odd about the ship. And then he's greeted by a bunch of growling soldiers that are actually like dogmen. Dogmen warriors are all, boom, all of a sudden at him. And he's like, oh. And then this enchantress, she comes wading out from amongst them and like holds them back. And it's just kind of like, what are you doing here? And he said, oh, you know, I made a bet with my friends to see if I could get on your boat. And then he's like, what is this craft made of? And it turns out that her entire ship that she's sailing the seas around in, is made of glass. And so, of course, the little ruffian character, whose name, by the way, is hilarious. It's so close to Taco. It's Jocko. Jocko. Jaco is his name. So the enchantress says to Jocko, my ship is glass. And he's like, no way. And she's like, yeah, it is. And he's like, well, why has this not been obliterated then? I mean, she's like, oh, it's very special glass. Go ahead, try and destroy it. Do whatever you want. So he starts railing on it and booting it and just laying as much damage into it as he could. And he's amazed because he knows that if he was on a wooden boat, he would see little indentations in the wood and stuff from what he's done. This ship is literally indestructible and made of glass, which is very cool. So, why is she here? She has come to the city of glassmakers to look for an artisan who is capable of making what she needs. And you find out that she's a really interesting character. She's apparently converted dogs into her troops. These dogmen were originally dogs that she's turned into dogmen that serve her loyally. Now she shows up to the glassmakers, and before she even shows up, she sends one of her men out on the wharf to meet with the representation of the glassmakers guild. And they're just like, okay, enchantress whatever wants to meet with all the glassmakers, assemble them. And the guy is kind of like, the glassmaker representative is kind of like a little affronted to this, until they slam a chest down in front of him, open it, and it's just full of jewels, like a massive amount of jewels. Like, and he's like, this is the payment for what you want done? And he's like, no, this is just part of the payment to spread the message. The payment is much larger. So then the word gets spread all throughout the city. Basically, a bunch of runners are sent with these jewels. Like, send these to all the major glassmakers, because the head of each glassmaking house, each noble glassmaking house, is going to want to come and vie for this commission, because clearly whoever can complete whatever her commission is going to get an insane amount of wealth if this is what she can just throw around assembling everybody. So you end up with the glassmakers assembled. Now, in this story, they don't spend a lot of time giving names to a lot of the other glassmaker houses. The main one is Pahardis, the house that Jocko worked for, because these are the ones going on in the story. But all the glassmakers assemble, and basically what the enchantress does is she shows an image of what she needs created. And it's a particular blue sphere that she needs, and it has to be cast purely... It has to be made purely with no imperfections whatsoever. So in terms of the reward, she says to them all, I will offer $300,000 of their local currency, whatever it is, for the artisan that can craft what I need. And then there's all this squabbling going on where like somebody goes, oh, I'll do it. And then they go, you're just the people who make window panes. You got no chance. And it turns out Pahardis is the best choice for it, because he is the one who's responsible for blowing out gigantic objects. So he has a specialty in the sort of thing that she already needs. Now, during this argument between all the glassmakers, the enchantress gets annoyed because she doesn't have too much time. So she stamps her foot out of annoyance. And it creates a massive crack in the floor, and that freaks everybody in the room out because it's lead tempered glass. It should be able to withstand an insane amount of force. And she just stamped her foot and it just cracked. And almost every glassmaker at that point bounced out. They're like, I don't want this commission, I'm leaving. And they almost all left. Pahardis stuck around. He ended up being the one to strike a deal with her. The deal they ended up making was, she's like, okay, here's how it works. I will pay you if you can complete it, but you have to do everything on your own. And if you don't actually successfully complete this, I pay you nothing. So he figured Pahardis is like, oh, you know what? I can make this happen. And he's greedy too. So he's like, he agrees to it, shakes her hand. She disappears in a flash of smoke, and the floor heals itself up like it was never broken in the first place. And it turns out Pahardis goes off, and the problem for him becomes that it's not regular glass she needs. She needs glass made out of carnelian stones. That's specifically what she needs. It's this blue gemstone. Now, to work this kind of gemstone compared to glass is a lot more difficult. It causes Bahardis some real problems. He has hammers that are made out of stone that he uses as part of his glass making process, but they break. So he has to upgrade to iron hammers, which costs him a considerable amount of money and time. Then when it comes down to melting it down, carnelian doesn't melt at the same melting point. So now he needs stronger furnaces. So he has to go out and hire more and more people for this. So he's expending crazy amounts of resources. Then when he gets the carnelian actually melted, each time he casts it into the object that she needs. And keep in mind, it has to be perfect and flawless. He cracks open the mold and it just breaks down to dust. There's nothing there. And this happens to him over and over as he repeats the process. And he's getting more and more squirrely and concerned because she's going to be leaving at a certain point, and all the resources he spent are all for nothing. All for nothing if he cannot complete the commission. So he starts to roust his own family members. Like the young nobles and everything like that are forced down there to work the bells. Like everybody in the household is forced into work. So what happens is they all start dipping off. They all start taking off so he doesn't have anybody around. And it's getting closer and closer to that deadline. And he keeps failing and keeps failing until finally he actually gets the mix right. And he creates, while rough, the object that the enchantress wants. And he brings it to her, and she takes it, and she looks at it, and she's like, this will suffice. And then they go back to the glass ship, right? And she disappears inside of it with this object. And a few minutes later, the ship flies off into the air. Literally like it sailed there in the water. It flies off into the air to the amazement of everyone who's there. Now, before she had flown off, she dumped 11 chests on the wharf as payment for the creation of the object. Now, Bahardis goes and opens up the chest, and it turns out each one of these chests is filled with carnelian stones. And the carnelian stones were really, really, really rare until now. He says, wow, these are rare stones. And someone nearby laughs. Well, they were. And he's got all these carnelians. Now, it doesn't take long before he goes, wait a minute. Like, this device actually, sorry, I missed one part. When he cast the object originally, before he gave it to the enchantress, it was following him around. So it had just gotten out of the cast, and it's still blazing hot. And it follows him around, it taps against his arm and burns him. And he's like, get away from me. And the sphere just starts to fly off. He's like, no, come back. And it flies right back to him. And then he's like, hey, head up to the ceiling. So it heads up to the ceiling, and then it comes back down. And he's like, oh. So when she flies away on the ship, you can tell it's a levitation device. What it is, these are magical spheres that levitate. They draw mana from the surrounding area, pull it into the sphere, and use that to levitate the ship. And it can carry any amount of weight. So it dawns on Bahardis really quickly that, wait a minute, he has the process and the materials to make these levitation spheres. So basically, as a test, he creates a smaller one. And then he goes out and he gets a blacksmith to create a little fine metal mesh to put over it. And then he turns it into like a carrier, basically. And so in a very brief amount of time, he starts casting hundreds of these stones. And people start buying them, and they start to do all the manual labor. So all the laborers are no longer needed. They're all down at the docks with no ability to make any money, no ability to feed themselves. They're having this situation is getting dire, okay? It's things are getting ugly. Jocko's part of this group too. Jocko is the one who came up with the idea that actually ended up ruining the entire island. It's pretty crazy what happens after this point. So we've got all these blue spheres flying around or whatever, right? Jocko goes around and starts talking to all these disenfranchised workers. Now, some of them said he was crazy, and they're like, no. We're not getting involved in this. Get out of here with whatever. But at the end, you find out what his plan was. Is they went around and they trapped every single one of these orbs under something. They nailed it down to the ground. They fucking covered them in all kinds of... Basically, they buried them, whatever it takes to get them connected to the island itself. So people wake up in the morning and they start trying to summon these orbs because these orbs are all controlled by your thoughts and everything, right? So they start summoning their orbs, or they're trying to, but the orbs aren't coming. And so they start issuing stronger and stronger commands. Now, these orbs are pure magic, so they're drawing magic from the outer area as more like willpower is being forced into them by their owners. And so they're all rooted in the island. And at a certain point, there's so much force being exerted by the orb's owners that the island itself rips up out of the earth. I'm gonna read this paragraph because I really enjoyed it. Zago followed the pointing hand of his fellow oarsman. A gigantic ring of pulverized coral and sand rose into the sky, followed a heartbeat later by the island of Corby. Behind the familiar shore, a thick disk of rock and reef clung, holding the island together as it soared aloft. Dark objects, tiny at this distance, fell from the edge, and Zago thought he heard screams. All sound was lost when the sea rushed in to claim the whole Corby left behind. Oh man, that is some epic, epic flavor. So, what happens next, you ask? Well, the inhabitants of the island find themselves in the sky, and then they freak out. They don't want to crash down, so they keep commanding the orbs to fly higher and higher to the point where they're now up above the clouds. And so this entirety, they exist now so high up in the sky that they are the blue moon. You learn this story through this dude telling his apprentice about it. Basically, he takes his apprentice out to an inn, and instead of them eating in the inn as normal, they sit out under the sky for one night, and the master buys him some beef and everything like it. It's this big special occasion. He doesn't know why. And the master pulls out a telescope and shows him the moon, like, take a look at that, and explains to him that that's actually the Isle of Corby flying up there. And the blue glow is all the blue stones. And as soon as the last inhabitant of the island dies, that the blue moon will plummet back down out of orbit, back down out of the heavens, back down to Earth. That's so amazing. It's such an epic story. I genuinely enjoyed it, and I couldn't find anything about it anywhere. And these are official, like, canon part of magic, right? So this is a real deal thing. The blue moon is a real thing. This island was a real thing. It's so cool. The idea of levitation spheres that are linked up, dragging this entire island up. So, let me know what you guys think. We're going to check in with the 6th color of magic.
What's up, Perp fam? It's your boy, Seth Massacre, aka Sloth Massacre. Together, we are the 6th color of magic.
Alright, and the last thing to do is to roll that golden scroll. The people who have my back on Patreon. Thank you very much. So, what's next? Well, you want to watch some magic videos, or you want to watch some magic videos? Hail to the king, baby!